Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to our talk this week. The topic is the heart of the matter, the things you miss when you're under pressure. And I was writing, actually, this all began last week. At this time, I was leading a guided meditation, as I do, and when I closed my eyes and started to pay attention to sensation, I realized I was feeling pressure in my chest, and I didn't really think too much of it. Obviously, I was leading a meditation, so my focus was on guiding that, but I was aware of it, and actually in the recording I said, "Oh, it hurts when I breathe." Didn't realize that until I had started meditating. And that's one of the amazing things. I've had a daily meditation practice since 2001, and it never ceases to amaze me how many things are happening outside of our awareness all the time. And then, you close your eyes and you start to pay attention to sensation, but also tune in to the environment around you, the temperature, any sounds that are present, and it's a shock. There's just a lot happening. And when I first started meditating, it would feel as though the birds had waited to start chirping until I was meditating, which of course I knew even day one that was not the case, but they were so loud and it was so incredible that it seemed almost impossible that you could miss it. And so it's always like that. We're always missing so much information that's happening in the present moment if we're not tuned in, if we're not very intentional about focusing. And sensation, I think one of the reasons I love a sensation-based practice is it's always happening in the here and now. So if you are tuned in to sensation, then you're also tuned into the present moment. In other words, if you have an ache somewhere, that's happening right now. It's not happening yesterday or tomorrow. And so if you're aware of that, then, you're here, you're present. And it's the same if you notice your jaws clenching or your eyebrows are furrowing or your shoulders are up around your ears. That's your body telling you you're not relaxed right now. You might feel some discomfort, some anxiety, some fear, whatever it is. If you're noticing those things, then you have information about how you're feeling in the moment. And that can be really helpful, especially if you're in a conversation or you're driving or you're heading somewhere, to be aware of what's happening within you so that you can be accountable for the energy that you're spreading. And I know that can sound really like woo, new agey, oh, I'm spreading energy, but we're energetic creatures. Wherever we go, we're giving off energy and we're absorbing it. And that is why if you come into contact with someone who's having a really lousy day, you're going to feel that energy from them. And we all have tough days. It's not to say that that's not okay. We all have difficult times and moments when we're not going to, be operating from our highest selves. But when you know that, when you're having a tough day, then at least you can say to yourself, okay, I know that I'm struggling right now and I don't really want to spread that as I'm going about my business. So I'm going to try to manage, my own stuff. I'm not going to walk into a room and take everybody down with me. And I don't know if you've ever been around people who have a very difficult time with self-soothing and, regulation, right? Like regulating themselves, regulating their nervous systems. But if you've ever been in a room with someone who is having a tough time and they're kind of sucking the oxygen out of the room, you know what I'm talking about, and it's really not okay to take a room hostage because you're having a tough moment, um, it's not what you want to be doing. Let's put it that way. So I start meditating last week and I realized, oh, there's this pressure in my chest that I hadn't been aware of, and it hurts to breathe. That's interesting. Carry on with the meditation, focus on what I'm doing and the people who have shown up to meditate with me. And at the end of that, when I signed off, I spent a few minutes just kind of examining, like, what is this feeling that I'm feeling? Did I pull a muscle in my chest during my practice the day before? Could this be something from like sleeping funny? And it was an odd sensation, an unfamiliar sensation. And I realized it was pressure around my heart, that's what it felt like. And of course that's not like, that's not great. That's not really what you want, but I noticed it, and it wasn't pain and it wasn't radiating anywhere. It was just very sort of concentrated, and it was like at about a 4. So I just took note of that and went about my day. The day before, I'd had a physical, and it was with a new doctor in a new practice, and there were some strange things that occurred. My blood pressure was extremely low, and my blood pressure is always low. I'm always like 90/60 or 85/55, so that wasn't unusual. But this reading, the first reading they did, was like 83/33, and the nurse was like, whoa, are you okay? Like, are you feeling faint? Are you feeling nauseous? I'm like, no, I feel totally fine. And so she did it again. She did it a third time, and it continued. It wasn't that low, but it was lower than normal for sure. And I was sort of joking with her, like, am I alive? And she was not joking. She was not finding it funny. She was definitely worried. And then the doctor came in, and she seemed less worried and about that particular issue because I was feeling fine. And so she proceeded to ask me a whole bunch of questions about lifestyle, the way a good doctor will. She took my health history, asked about my family and all of that. And I mentioned to her that a couple of years ago I had had a physical with my previous doctor, and they did blood work, and my cholesterol was strangely high given my lifestyle and my diet. I have, typical kind of like Los Angeles yoga teacher. Like, I have that, I'm vegetarian and I'm mostly gluten-free, and I'm just a healthy, I'm a healthy eater, and I'm certainly practicing yoga all the time, and I do cardio. So it was a strange read for me to get that blood work back. And my doctor said, you probably have the genetic predisposition for high cholesterol, and it's called familial cholesterolemia, which is just a ridiculous name. And so, but he sent me for a scan of my carotid artery and my heart, and everything came back great. No plaque, no buildup. So he didn't put me on medication and sent me on my way. And that was it. So I shared that with her. So now it's the next day. I've got this chest pressure, and I get an alert that there's a message from my new doctor. And I open the app, and it's like her message is just full of exclamation marks. It's the first thing I see. And I'm like, ooh, that's probably not great. And sure enough, she was like, your cholesterol is super high, and I want to put you on medication right away because it doesn't matter if it's genetic or not, your risk of heart disease and stroke goes way up with this kind of read. So I was like, I'm going. I don't need the exclamation. I'm on my way. And I went to the pharmacy, and I started taking the medication right away. But I'm aware, of course, as I'm getting this message that I've got this pressure in my chest. I'm thinking, that's too coincidental. Like, I mean, I was feeling it before I got her message, but it just still felt like I'm fine. And so that's kind of what I was telling myself through the day. I'm fine. I'm all right. I'm paying attention to this. I'm on top of it. It's, I'm super healthy. My blood pressure's low. If you were having like a heart attack, your blood pressure would not be low. So it was just kind of reassuring myself that all was well and this was going to pass, that it would just, subside, and it would just be one of those weird things. That is not what happened. As the day went on, it just stayed. It wasn't worse, it wasn't better, just there. And as the night wore on, I started to feel like, this is probably like, this is strange, like, what is this actually? And what are the precursors when you're gonna have a heart attack? So, of course, I do the thing that you just shouldn't do on a Friday night, and I Google. And and it's different for women than it is for men. Like, there are different markers for this stuff. And so it was a little murky, it was kind of like, ugh, should I be going to the ER? I don't want to go to the ER. And I had a real resistance that wasn't rational. I just really didn't want to go. And I wasn't placing that. I just was observing, like, I really don't want to go to the hospital. And so I watched a movie with my husband. We went to bed, and as soon as I got horizontal, the pressure went up to a 7. And I mean, these are my numbers, but it was noticeably more apparent. And so then I started crying because I'm like, ugh, and I was exhausted. I was so tired. It was late. All I wanted to do was go to sleep. And now I'm like, am I being one of those people that you read about later and you're like, why didn't they go to the hospital? Like, what were they thinking? Or am I okay? Like, and my husband was great. He's like, if you feel like we need to go, we're going to go. If you want to try to sleep, that's whatever you want to, whatever you're feeling is fine. But he felt pretty certain, like, I'm not having a heart attack and I'm not going to have a heart attack. So I decided I'm going to try to sleep. And it wasn't super successful. I fell asleep about 4 a.m. I woke up in the morning and it was still there. So at that point, I'm like, all right, I can't deny this anymore. Like, I've got to, not deny it, I wasn't denying it, but I can't ignore this, or I can't just wait for this to subside. I need to figure out what this is. This is a sensation that's not going anywhere. So I found this online resource where you can actually get a doctor on the phone, because I couldn't get my doctor to return messages on the weekend. And I got a cardiologist on the phone. She was amazing. She started asking me all these questions. She was so calm. She was so knowledgeable. And after talking to me for about 15, maybe 20 minutes, she was like, okay, I think you have pericarditis, which is, she asked me if I'd been sick recently, and I was sick over Christmas. I had what I thought was a cold, and the whole house had it, and we were hunkered down at home. We weren't like going out. So it was just, didn't seem like anything too extreme. And she said, I bet you had COVID. It's surging right now. If you didn't have COVID, you probably had one of the other sort of upper respiratory infections that are just going around. And pericarditis is, what it is there's like fluid around your heart, and sometimes it can become inflamed if there's a viral infection or a bacterial infection. And so that can create this pressure. And sometimes it's mild pericarditis, and sometimes it's really intense. And she says, I want you to go. I don't think you're having a heart attack. I don't think you're going to have a heart attack, but I want you to go to the hospital, because sometimes it needs medication, bed rest. Like, you need to know if that's what it is, but it's a symptom that it's worse when you are reclined than it is when you're sitting up. So we go and, check in, and they gave me an EKG, more blood work, a chest x-ray, and a CAT scan with dye, which is a very strange sensation. The dye is hot, and you can feel that moving through your body. So a lot of sensations to work with for me. But one of the biggest sensations I was feeling when we got there, and they put me in this, I got in the robe, and they put me in the bed, and they had these electrodes hooked up to me. I was connected to machines, and there's a machine beeping, and I suddenly realized why I had not wanted to go to the hospital. And it's because I spent the last month of my mother's life in the ICU with her. And it's still alive inside of me, that month and that experience. And that is what sort of like came to the surface, was a lot of fear of, I didn't want to be admitted. I really was just so focused on, like, I just want to go. I want to get the information. I want to get out of here. but it took about 4 hours. I'm totally fine. It is pericarditis, mild pericarditis. I was cleared to teach my yoga class, my 90-minute yoga class the next day, and to, work out, to go back to all normal activities, and to take ibuprofen if the pressure was bothering me. But that's what it was. Heart super healthy. So that's like the great information that I got. Like, all the tests came back really well. The scan was great. They scanned my lungs. They scanned, I have been thoroughly looked at, and everything is wonderful. So that was the good news. But while I was waiting to figure that out, and I was in that environment, it really brought all that stuff with my mom to the surface, and just the thought that, I am 52 and I'm going to be 53 in February, and the reality is that the older we get, the more statistically it's possible that some of these things that go wrong could be serious. And I'm aware of that. And I think that I'm aware of that because of what I went through with my mother, but also my dad died in July of this past year. So I've had a lot of loss in the last few years, and I have these beautiful children who are 14 and 17. There's so much life that I have left to live, and so many people I treasure that I don't want to leave. Obviously, my children and husband are at the top of the list, but my close friends, my community, just being here on earth, as absolutely heartbreaking and just confusing as it is sometimes, the kind of mess we're making of it, I still love being here. And I am finding that this stage of life that I'm in, which is very solidly middle age, right? I'm in the middle years. If I'm lucky enough to live as long as my dad did, then I'm right in the middle right now. And what I am finding is that it's such an interesting part of life. It's such an interesting time right now because, society would tell you, and does tell you, that when you're a woman over 50, you become invisible or irrelevant. And I am not experiencing that. I have not found that to be the case. That does not resonate with my experience at all. I feel more fired up now than I ever have. I feel more I feel on fire, and I feel inspired, and compelled to be creating and writing and doing this, having these conversations and traveling and learning things, absorbing everything I can, and having real conversations, and not wasting any time. I want to finish my book. I'm super close. There's a lot of things that I am so excited about. And I think one of the things that has come out of losing both of my parents in the last few years, which obviously was devastating, my mother in particular, that was such a huge, painful loss. And the grief that I experienced in the year after was, I've never experienced anything like it. Panic and just all of it, was so primal and so intense. But it softened me in a way, and it opened me, and it gave me, I think, this insight about how fleeting it is, and how there really is no time to waste. And just, I also was in the room with my mother when she exhaled for the last time. I was there, and I might start crying. And I went, my dad, I was not there. It happened in the very early hours of the morning, but I went when I found out. Obviously I went, and I was with him. So I've seen both of my parents' bodies, and there is something, I don't know if I can, it's a really intense experience to be in a room with your parents' body and they're not alive anymore. They're not there in their bodies anymore. It really, drives home the reality that your body's just a container for however long you're here. It's just the vessel that you're living inside of. And all of your energy, your creative energy, your thoughts, your memories, your experiences, the people that you've loved, the hugs that you've given and received, like that is this just your body. And I think when you see your own parents leave their bodies, it just, there isn't any way, you can't deny the reality of, wow, this is a gift, that I'm here and that I have a body and I have a voice and I have a mouth that I can open and speak, and I have thoughts in my head that I can put out into the world, and I have things that I've learned that I can share that might be helpful to someone else, and I don't want to waste any time. And if I am lucky enough to have people in my life I love, I want to make sure they know that every single day. I don't want to, waste any time at all or any moments. I want to make sure that everyone in my life knows how I feel about them. So there's no uncertainty, so that if, one day one of these things that can arise is a serious thing, like I know that I lived my heart out and I loved my heart out and I wrote my heart out. Like I want to be living at that level. I don't want to be living at like 50%. I want to be living at like, 110%. And I have so much still that I want to do, but I don't take it for granted at all anymore. And I think that's one of the things that you do get. They say youth is wasted on the young. I don't know. I think you enjoy it. Enjoy feeling invincible. It's great. Have a good time with that. But eventually you're gonna be in a body for a long time. Things are gonna start to happen. And so it's good if you aren't taking it for granted. And it's good if you aren't sort of pushing it out of your awareness that time is short. I think when you get to a certain point, you really do want to understand that time is short and there's no time to be wasting. And if you aren't living in a way that feels good, like today is the right day to start trying to figure it out, or to ask for help, or to figure out what you need to make a shift. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. And so that part, that feels great. The part that is not as easy is all the other stuff that comes along with this chapter. And I was talking about that in the personal essay this week, the sandwich generation. If you have kids, not everyone has kids, but you probably have people that you're responsible for, and so what happens when you get to this age, to the middle years, is you're kind of, if you do have children, then you're right smack between aging parents who probably need you and teenagers who may not always think they need you or want to need you. They still need you, and they probably need you in harder ways than they did when they were little, and you could just get a Band-Aid and kiss the knee. It's, as they say, little kids, little problems. Not always, but when you're lucky, little kids, little problems, and bigger kids, bigger problems. And so you're just in this, you're sandwiched between all of these people and situations that really require a lot of thought, care, energy, time, devotion, and sometimes it's really difficult. And I've been writing about this for the last few years. It can be really complicated. I had a complicated relationship with both parents. My mother, our relationship was complicated because she was an alcoholic and she wouldn't deal with it. And so our entire relationship was, I was sort of maneuvering around that reality and trying to be as close to her as I could without subjecting myself to painful, disappointing treatment. So I had to always walk this line, and it was, heartbreaking because I really, really loved my mother. My dad, he's my dad. He had a lot of, I think, really great qualities as a person, and I think he might have been I know that he was a good friend to a lot of people and that he was a beloved uncle. He wasn't the greatest guy to have as your dad. And certainly as a daughter, it was not easy to be his daughter. He was just a Olympic level womanizer. And so I've written a lot about that, and I won't get into that too much, but he used to take me with him, and he exposed me to a whole bunch of things that no kid really needs to be thinking about or worrying about, and it did a number on me that I really had to work out. So when I became responsible for him at the end of his life, it was tough. I had to really do a lot of work on what do I owe this person, and what feels okay for me, like how much of a sacrifice am I going to make at this point for someone who really wasn't terrific to me, and where's that line? And for me, it became more about how do I feel about myself, and this person is at the end of his life, and I want to make sure that he feels cared for and loved. I certainly am not going to be rehashing ancient history with a 96-year-old man. Like, that's not going to happen. So, I had to struggle through that. And my mother was a whole other thing that happened first. That happened in 2021, and she got ALS out of nowhere. And so then I was flying back and forth from LA to New York, and then I ended up basically being in New York for the better part of the last month of her life, and just flying home for like a night to look at my kids, look at my hut, make sure everything was okay, and head back out. So all of that stuff came up for me when I was in that hospital room waiting for the results and having, this test and then that test. And meanwhile, like my index finger, there's like, the machine is beeping, and the blood pressure and my heart rate was like all over the place, which apparently is really normal, but you're not usually tracking it and watching the numbers go up and down. So it was wild. And I just realized as I was going through all of that, oh wow, okay, the reason that it took me 24 hours to actually go to the hospital is that I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to be in this environment again. And the ER and the ICU, there's something, it's like its own world. And if you've been there, then you know what I mean. And if you haven't, like, that's wonderful. And I hope you never have to. But it's a colorless, it's like, everything, and this was the case in New York in the ICU with my mom. This was the case at the ER, and it's been the case at any hospital I've ever been in when someone is really not okay. So the ER, ICU, it's just a lifeless color. It's a washed out yellow, and everything is the floors, the walls, the curtains. It's just, I don't know why, but my husband was saying it might be for like so that dirt really shows up. I don't know, but it's kind of awful, and it's fluorescent lights, and people start to take on that same color if they're there for too long. And all I wanted was just to go home. I just wanted to go home. So I just did not want them to admit me overnight. And so then when I understood what was going on and what that resistance was, and this is what I mean about having a meditation practice, right, is that you might not be instantly aware of everything happening in every moment, but if you have a daily practice for a long time, you're probably going to realize what's happening with you, even if it takes a little time. So I just realized while I was sitting there, in the bed there, oh, I know what's happening here. I'm like feeling this enormous vulnerability and fear that what happened to my mother is going to happen to me. Not that it's the same thing, but like I'm going to be admitted and there's going to be a problem, and I'm not going to make it home. And just the thought of that was like just so sad, like I'm just not ready. And so I ended up feeling like, I'm happy to say, one of the other nice things about being this age is that I understand what self-compassion is, and I just really had a lot of compassion for myself, and I had to kind of I started to reassure myself, like, okay, of course you're feeling that way, and of course you didn't want to come here, and of course all that stuff that you went through is you're in the same environment with the same noises and the same colors and the same sounds. Like, of course that's what's coming to the surface. And just kind of like, thankfully know how to remind myself to just slow down my breathing and, reassure myself both physically and emotionally that like all is well. And thankfully all was well. And I went home with a clean bill of health and just, knowing that I have a strong heart and I'm on a medication now. One of the other things I was writing about, and I'll share this now because I know I got super emotional there and very sad, and it is vulnerable being a human being, and it's very easy to want to just kind of push that to the side, that thing of like, we have limited time here, you want to be aware of it enough that it's inspiring you not to waste time, and not so aware of it that it's like scaring you and you can't move. Like you're trying to find the right balance of, I want to know that I'm vulnerable and time is short, but I don't want to be in fear around it. I want to be in action around that reality. And so my dad, I remembered that my dad was also, I think, like me in this way, just very, very healthy. For him, his thing was running. So when I was a kid, he always ran 6 miles a day in New York City. It wasn't great for his knees, I'll tell you. He ran around Central Park 6 miles a day every day. But by the time he was like, I'm trying to remember when his knee stuff started, but he was like in his 80s, I think, and he had to start, might have been in his 70s, I don't know. He started to lift his legs one at a time into the car, lift his legs out of the car. His knees were not in great shape, but he had always been that extremely active, healthy guy, never really drank. He'd have a beer once in a blue moon. Didn't smoke. He smoked a pipe for about, I think it was about 10 years during my childhood. But I mean, a healthy eater, always exercised, took really good care of himself, and packed these super healthy lunches for me that I hated as a kid. I remember like my best friend at the time, she would always share her lunch with me, and she would laugh. She's like, "Oh, you're at your dad's." Yep. Because there's like pumpernickel bread that would crumble, and I just didn't know as a child, like, this is actually really good for you. You should eat this. No, didn't like it. Liked the stuff that was at my mom's house, which was like not good. Like Wonder Bread and Miracle Whip and Kraft American cheese slices and Diet Coke and all these things that, of course, as I got older, I realized, well, none of that stuff has really anything that your body can recognize as food or use as fuel. But I didn't know that as a kid. So my dad was just super healthy, and what happened is he called me from Raleigh. He moved to North Carolina when I was 20, and he called me from Raleigh. I'm trying to remember exactly when, and I don't remember when, but I think he was probably like 70 or 75, and he told me that he had a cold, and he went to the doctor because he was kind of dizzy and he almost passed out in his yard. He was like watering his plants, and he had to sit down, so he drove himself to the doctor. And I remember saying to him, like, "Dad, like, what are you driving yourself to the doctor if you're that dizzy that you have to like sit down and you almost black out?" And he's like, "Oh, I was fine. So he got to the doctor, and the doctor like listened to his heart and took his blood pressure and said, "Hey, do you feel well enough to drive over to the hospital? I just want to run a couple other tests. I don't have the equipment here in the office that I need." And my dad was like, "Oh yeah, sure." So he drives himself to the hospital, and he pulls up, and there's like a team of doctors waiting to race him in for emergency pacemaker surgery. So he's telling me the story like it's funny, and I'm like, what? You didn't call me? And he's like, "Well, no, I knew it was going to be fine, and there's a team of doctors there." I'm like, "Dad, what if you had like died on the table? It would have been good to just like tell me what was happening." He's like, "Oh, I'm healthy as a horse." So, and he was, he lived to be 96 years old. But I think what had caused his heart problems was this familial hypercholesterolemia. Seriously, they need to do something about that name. So, yeah, I think that's what happened to him. And thankfully, because I am on top of my health and, you know, went to the doctor, and I'm lucky enough to have health care coverage. And I mean, let's really remember that's a whole thing, right? And having people also, when I went to the ER, just having people believe you when you're like, I have chest pressure, and do something about it. Like, not everyone is receiving that care here. So I'm very aware of that. But because I'm lucky enough to be able to have health insurance and stay on top of my health, I caught this and I'm taking medication. So now the medication will lower the cholesterol, and I'm probably not going to end up needing emergency pacemaker surgery like my dad. So there's like all these things are really good, and I do think that if you are in the middle years, which I'm really liking that term so much better than I like the way that sounds, the middle years, right? It's like you're right in the middle of your story. It's you want to be listening to your body, and if your body's telling you like, hey, something's weird, you want to go and figure it out and not talk yourself out of it. So I am so happy that, first of all, I went and did that. And obviously I care about myself enough to figure out, okay, who can I call on a Saturday? How can I go about getting like a cardiologist on the phone? And now let me take that advice and get myself to the ER. If also becoming aware of the fact that the hospital I have a lot of emotional feeling and resistance about going. I now know that. That's new information that I really wasn't aware of until this all happened, because I was checking myself later, like, why didn't I just go Friday? Why did I wait? And it's okay that I didn't go until Saturday, thankfully, but I mean, it might not have been, it's like in another situation, another person, it might not. So just to know that about yourself, like, okay, I have resistance to going to the hospital. I understand why. I can have compassion for myself, but I'm not going to like second guess next time. If something feels weird, I'm just going to go and deal with it. And I'm really happy to share this story. And of course, it's got a happy ending because I'm in great health. But for anyone else who might be in those middle years, to just start to maybe like try to develop a different kind of relationship with your body. I feel like we are so the societal pressure to look at the body and just look at the external part, and is it looking the way I want it to, rather than really be in this like beautiful partnership with your own body where you're listening and being respectful and paying attention and going and trying to figure things out if you're not well. It really is a big shift for a lot of people. And of course now I'm like talking about that and I'm thinking about other people in our country who do go to the hospital when they're not okay and are sent home, and how enraging that is, and how not okay that is, and how we all need to get really loud about that. Because if you're someone who goes to the hospital and you are taken seriously and you are seen right away and there are tests being done, then you get to use your voice for people that are not having that same experience. But just to understand that it's not a moment in time when you are in these years to not pursue things if something comes up, to trust your own body and to care enough to like pursue it. And also to be kind to yourself and to be aware of like whatever emotional, whatever feelings you're having about the fact that you're in the middle of your story, and sometimes there's family history. Like people, I've met people who are like, oh, my dad had a heart attack at 55. And so when I hit 55 and then past it, that was strange for me, to live past the year that my dad died or my mom died. Like it's, you don't really, it's good to examine whatever stories you're carrying about your family history and your own feelings about your own mortality, your own vulnerability, the amount of time that you have, like just to really be tuned in and kind to yourself, because there's some great things about hitting these years, for me at least. Like I'm loving it. I've never felt more myself. I've never felt more free to say what I think and write what I think and share what I think. And, not everybody has to like it. It's totally okay. But I'm certainly going to share anything that feels like it might be helpful to someone else. And that's all it is when you're creating, when you're talking and having a conversation like this, or you're writing something. Or when I'm teaching, it's like I'm always trying to share things that I hope are going to be helpful to someone. And if there are people who are like not into it, that's so fine. I'm not bothered. I'm not concerned. It's like I wish you well, and it's all good. So, it's all good in that regard. I'm not an it's all good person with everything in life, but I'm all good with people who are like not everybody has to like me or agree, or it's like it doesn't matter. It's totally fine. So it feels great to be at that age where you're just like out of what. I try to keep my language clean on the podcast because I never know if you're listening with your like little kids around or whatever. But I'm out of those. I don't have any more of those. I don't. And I'm not going to like sugarcoat things. And it's so much easier to say no. It is so much easier to say no. I can't even tell you the struggle I used to have if someone asked me something. And it's happened a few times in the last couple of months where someone's crossed a boundary that seems super obvious to me, like, no, no, that's not going to be possible. Like, no, I'm not going to be able to do that. Like, what? I don't even have to expend any energy on it anymore, whereas like, I think even 5 or 10 years ago, I might have had to really go through a whole thing about like, oh, I have to say no to that. Or like, I can't believe this person is asking this. And how can they not realize like that's totally inappropriate? Or how can they not understand what they're asking me for? Like I don't have to do any of that. I don't have to create I just can say, no, can't do that, and if I feel like I want to, then I can say, I can't do that. Here's why, I can do this. Like, it's just easy. There's no energy expenditure on that stuff. And there's no, like, when I write something and put it out into the world, of course, when you write, it's an attempt to connect, but I'm not like focused on the outcome the way that I was like 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I'm putting the work out and trusting that the people that it's going to resonate with are going to find it. And that's it, and that's it. Like, there's nothing more than that. And that's so freeing to get to that point. And also to allow, know that you're not going to get everything right all the time, and just give yourself more compassion, grace, space to be human, and also just to use your voice. So I hope that, something in this talk is helpful in some way. I hope that if you are not in your middle years yet, that maybe this makes you feel better about this phase of life, because it is beautiful and interesting, even though there's a lot of like intense emotion, and there's a lot of heartbreaking loss, and there's a lot of stress. There's just a lot of stress to manage. And then if you are going through perimenopause or menopause, there's all of that stuff. There's a lot of tears. There's a lot of, there's a lot of opening and stretching, and there's a lot, but it's freeing. And it's softening, and it's just kind of amazing. And so I hope that if you are heading toward these years, maybe this makes you feel better about it. And if you're in these years, I hope that it's helpful to you. And if you are struggling with the vulnerability of being in the middle of your life, like I hope this was helpful. And I'm always here for like further conversation or, questions or comments. I'm very easy to find. I wish you a lot of love. And until next time.